Nasrallah. His wife and his 3 small children are inside. The Israeli Defense Force says that their assignment is to sweep the area for booby traps and to uncover tunnels that might be used by the Palestinian resistance. The people living in Rafah have reason to think otherwise. They fear that this is another home demolition. The border town of Rafah has seen thousands of homes destroyed in the previous months as the IDF works to clear a security zone around the border. Every other structure in this area has already been knocked down. This house stands alone in a sea of rubble.
Every day hearing gunshots. I cannot sleep, you know. I'm thinking, wait, sound. I open, see, near my house, what happened, prepare yourself, like this, open the door, notice everything. I don't know, maybe I will die tomorrow. Maybe my daughter, my son.
8 members of a group known as the International Solidarity Movement have positioned themselves in front of the house in an attempt to obstruct the bulldozer's movements.
We are international, and we are unarmed. We are human rights observers. We are going to be staying here, and we will be knowing what you do. And if you shoot at this house, you will endanger the lives of internationals and innocent women and children, and the world will know.
Just after 3 o'clock, warning shots are fired from the tank, and then shot grenades and tear gas. But the group of internationalists continue their protest.
Please stop shooting, and I wish that you may learn to love your neighbors.
By 3:30, the work had come to a halt, and eventually the bulldozers and tanks began to withdraw toward the border. Sometime before 5 o'clock, the bulldozers are ordered to return to the area and to complete the work. The internationals believe that the house is about to be destroyed. They know that small children are inside. Rachel Corrie is one of the international protesters in the area. She's been living in the house of Dr. Nasrallah and his family since leaving her home in Olympia, Washington 7 weeks earlier. And now she is rushing to position herself between the bulldozer and the house. Who is Rachel Corrie? What was she doing in this small Palestinian border town? And why would she risk her own life to protect a family she had known for less than 2 months?
In the summer, the rushes grow so tall you can hide in them and be completely invisible. This is where I came from, tunnels through rushes. I could spend all the light hours of all the days in tunnels through rushes in the middle of the estuary, in the mouth of Perry Creek. This is where I came from, and this is where I would have liked to stay. Sunburned and hidden and close to water, making up whole pretend histories about shipwrecks and Swiss Family Robinson.
Rachel was our youngest child. We have 3 kids, and she was the baby. We live at the very, at the tip of Puget Sound and on a little stream, and she writes about the rushes in the water, which in the springtime, they start from nothing and they grow up, and she talks about wanting to hide in those rushes. That's where she would like to have stayed, sunburned, in the rushes. But of course, life drew her in other directions.
Rachel became, after 9/11, like all of us, she was very much moved by that. But I think after the first few weeks of sort of outrage and wondering what happened to our world, she decided to become a peace activist with that.
She wanted to connect with people and engage them around the question of, why would someone hate us? How could someone see us, Americans, as the enemy?
There were members of the International Solidarity Movement who had been in the West Bank, and also one of her friends to Gaza and Rafah. And so she started to learn about that. And I think she became convinced that the Israeli-Palestine conflict was really the sore point of the whole Middle East. It's the crux of where some of this poison goes out into the world. Rachel dug a little bit deeper in that, found, I think, that Palestinians are often forgotten in that narrative, and that one of the most forgotten places among that forgotten spot is Rafah at the very southern tip. It's a very conservative Muslim community.
Rafah in itself is a community on the border strip and with Egypt, and that border strip has had over 1,000 homes, Palestinian homes, demolished on it, and that has affected that community profoundly. Many people that were made homeless for the second or third time, having been refugees in the past by those demolitions. It's a community that's very traumatized by those experiences, and it's a community that is largely made up of children. I think almost half of the population is children under the age of 18. People don't have access to even clean drinking water. They don't have the ability to travel from Gaza to the West Bank to visit their families. They don't have the ability to even get paid to do their job anymore because there's no economic structure in place anymore. There's no money. These are basic human rights that are being taken away.
She finally decided that she needed to go and see for herself, as she put it, who's on the other end and what the other end of our tax dollars that is used for military. Rachel was 23 when she decided to do this, and so she's not asking for permission. It wasn't something that we were real excited about her doing. On the other hand, you can't ask your child to be something less than what they can be.
I know how much it just meant to her as a human being and as the human being she was coming to be, to find meaning in her life, to find something that seemed really important to work on. And I think she recognized that sometimes if you're able to, you do need to pick yourself up and to go and see for yourself what is happening.
So in the end, you kind of have to support it, and we did.
Rachel's plan was to travel to Gaza to initiate a sister city program between her hometown of Olympia and the Palestinian city of Rafah. On January 22nd, she arrived in East Jerusalem and began a 2-day training course at the West Bank headquarters of the International Solidarity Movement. 5 days later, she would travel with another ISM member across a border checkpoint and into Gaza.
The people there continuously are exposed to injury, death, detention, and all kind of hard living situation there. So this space is the space that Rachel Corrie was transferred from this very nice environment into that very miserable environment. And this is the big shift in life. Like, you would have in your mind two very contrast picture of a green and picture of a black. And then you would start make comparison between these things. And then you would start analyze and asking very big questions why we have this big contrast.
Rachel Corrie arrived in Rafah, a small town on the southernmost edge of Gaza, along the border known by the IDF as Philadelphia Road, or the Pink Line. Rafah has long been the center of the Palestinian resistance, a resistance which has taken on many forms. While the majority here practice non-violent resistance, there are groups of masked militants who engage in guerrilla warfare and smuggle weapons in through tunnels from Egypt. The Israeli Defense Force says that the home demolitions are a way to find guerrilla hideouts and eliminate these tunnels. But for people like Dr. Nasrallah living in Rafah, who are never charged with a crime, but whose homes are destroyed, this is viewed as a form of illegal collective punishment. It has also become apparent that the goal of at least some of these home demolitions is to clear an area for construction of an iron and cement wall, a wall that the IDF views as a security measure, and the Palestinians view as another human rights violation. Rachel began documenting what she was witnessing in emails that she would send to friends and family back home.
I have been in Palestine for 2 weeks and 1 hour now, and I still have very few words to describe what I see. It is most difficult for me to think about what's going on here when I sit down to write back to the United States. I don't know if many of the children here have ever existed without tank shell holes in their walls and the towers of an occupying army surveying them constantly from the near horizons. I think, although I'm not entirely sure, that even the smallest of these children understand that life is not like this everywhere. Once you have seen the ocean and lived in a silent place where water is taken for granted and not stolen in the night by bulldozers, and once you have spent an evening when you haven't wondered if the walls of your home might suddenly fall inward, waking you from your sleep, and once you've met people who have never lost anyone, once you have experienced the reality of a world that isn't surrounded by murderous towers, tanks, armed settlements, and now a giant metal wall, I wonder if you can forgive the world for all the years of your childhood spent existing, just existing, in resistance to the constant stranglehold of the world's fourth largest military, backed by the world's only superpower, in its attempt to erase you from your home. That is something I wonder about these children.
She just worked endlessly, writing all the time. She talks about writing in every crack, every space, every time that she can find.
She was writing those emails to her mother, telling her about what was going on there, and hoping that maybe those emails would maybe make them get out into the rest of the world.
Today, as I walked on top of the rubble where homes once stood, Egyptian soldiers called to me from the other side of the border, "Go, go," because a tank was coming. And then waving and, "What's your name?" Something disturbing about this friendly curiosity. It reminded me of how much, to some degree, we are all kids curious about other kids. Egyptian kids shouting at strange women wandering into the path of tanks. Palestinian kids shot from the tanks when they peek out from behind walls to see what's going on. International kids standing in front of tanks with banners. Israeli kids in the tanks anonymously, occasionally shouting, and also occasionally waving. Many forced to be here, many just aggressive, shooting into the houses as we wander away.
Her emails were going to our family members. We were sending them out to family and friends, and she was sending them to other friends. And I remember asking my son, "What do you think about what you're reading?" And he said, "It's amazing because it's not a perspective that I usually see or get." And we saw our family's understanding of the situation expand and start expanding from the time Rachel was there.
We don't choose who we are. We don't choose where we're born. We don't choose our parents. We don't choose their politics. We don't choose our politics until that critical moment in our lives when we begin to ask, what kind of person do I want to be? What are my principles? What kind of world I want to be part of?
I'm witnessing this chronic, insidious genocide, and I'm really scared and questioning my fundamental belief in the goodness of human nature. This has to stop. I think it is a good idea for us all to drop everything and devote our lives to making this stop. I don't think it is an extremist thing to do anymore. I still really want to dance around to Pat Benatar and have boyfriends and make comics for my coworkers, but I also want this to stop. Disbelief and horror is what I feel. Disappointment. I am disappointed that this is the base reality of our world and that we, in fact, participate in it.
1/10 of the population of Rafah have lost their homes, according to Human Rights Watch. It was wholesale demolition of homes in this area. It was remarkable to see, as Rachel said, it is so hard to imagine without really being there, no matter how many films you see, no matter how many newspaper articles you read. It was a sea of rubble because of the homes that had been destroyed.